Welcome back, everybody. In our last video, we talked about how to simplify radicals. You want to look for a perfect square that goes into it, the largest perfect square, and you break it up. So 50 would be 25 times 2. Square root of 25 is just 5, so you lose that radical and keep the radical 2. So I'm going to show you a calculator shortcut for this. And I would definitely keep this handy, so if you are working on some practice or a quiz, you can use these steps so you don't have to memorize them. So basically, let's say I give you 75, the square root of 75. All right, if you type that into your calculator, second x squared 75, it's not a perfect square, all right? It's irrational, so I need to simplify it. So you need to think about the biggest perfect square that goes into it. All right, so here are some of the first perfect squares. 25 times 3, think of change. 75 cents, 3 quarters. So by hand, you would do 25 times 3. Each one gets its own radical. The square root of 25 is 5, and then bring the radical 3 down. Now, again, sometimes those numbers can be difficult. Sometimes you don't know your perfect squares. So we're going to let our calculator help us. So what you're going to do is go to y equals, and you're going to take the number divided by x squared. So I'm going to go to y equals right now, and I'm just going to type 75, no radical sign, divided by x squared. Okay? So go to y equals 75 divided by x squared. And this works for every radical. It simplifies it down for you. Now we're going to go to the table. All right. Now we're just dealing with positive values here. So when you go to the table, you're going to scroll down until you see a 1 in the y column, 1 point something. Once you do, you're going to go back up to the first set of whole numbers, no decimals. And whatever those numbers are, the x goes in front of your radical sign, and y goes underneath it. So for 75, if we take a look in our table, you see right here, let me go over there, 175, which is what you're looking at when you're looking at the square root of 75. But you want to go down until you see a 1. All right, see there's 1, 7, 1 point something. Go back up until you see the first set of whole numbers, 5 radical 3. All right, so I'm just going to write that down. So we see 5, 3, and then I see 7, 1 point something. We're not looking at the decimals. So basically, you type in the number, you go down to y, go to y equals the number divided by x squared, go to the table, scroll down until you find a 1 in the y column, and go back up until you see the first set of whole numbers, 5, 3. So that means your radical simplified is 5 radical 3. The x goes in front, the y value goes underneath the radical. Okay, so let's try some of these. So 90, again, you might be able to do it by hand just as quickly. You might recognize as 9 times 10, right? 9 is the perfect square. Square root of 9 is 3, radical 10. All right, maybe that's not easy for you. So why don't we try it in the calculator? Y equals, I'm just going to change the 75 to 90 divided by x squared. Go to the table, go down until you find a 1, go back up until you see whole numbers, no decimals, 3 radical 10, there it is. I'm just putting this in so you remember to go down to 1 and then go back up. 3 radical 10 is our answer. All right, why don't we try just using the calculator for this next one? So we'll go to y equals, I'm going to hit clear, 128 divided by x squared. Second graph, go to the table, go down, so there's 2 radical 32, 4 radical 8, 8 radical 2, and then the 1. So the 8 radical 2 is the one that's most simplified. So each of these simplifies it down a little bit, but you want to go to the one that's most simplified. Again, I'm going to copy that down just so you have it. So we went to y equals 128 divided by x squared. And then in our table, we saw 128. Let's see what else we had. 4882. Okay, we had 4882. No, you don't have to show all this work each time, but I just want it there for you. So you go back up until you hit your first set of whole numbers. So your answer would be 8 radical 2. All right, if you were doing it by hand, I'm going to go to the main screen. I would need to know the factors of 128. 128 divided by 2. Check and see if it's a perfect square. Yep, 64 and 2. 64, 8 times 8, right? So if you did it that way, oops. If we did it that way, it would have been, you broke it up into 64 times 2, which also simplifies to 8 radical 2. So whatever method you prefer, you can use. All right, 72, y equals 72 divided by x squared. Take a look at the table, go down to where you find a 1, and go back up, 6 radical 2. Again, you could break it up. 72 is 36 times 2. If you don't know your perfect squares, that's going to be tough to find. Square root of 36 is 6 radical 2. Same thing. Or just go to y equals. All right, here's one with a number out front, so we'll deal with that after. All right, 18 can be broken down into 9 times 2. Or you could have gone to your calculator and just typed in 18 divided by x squared. Go to your table, 3 radical 2, which the square root of 9 is 3, and then radical 2. So you can get it either from the table or by simplifying by hand. But now we have that 3 that was out front to deal with. We can't just forget about it. So remember, whatever's out front gets multiplied. So now 3 is out there with it. 3 times 3 is 9 radical 2. And if you ever wanted to check to see if you did it right, type the original in, 3 radical 18. Again, second mode will get you out of the table. 3 radical 18 gives us this decimal. 9 radical 2, which is what we think our answer is, gives you the same thing. You know you're right. All right, 3 more. 45. That's 9 times 5. But again, if you're not sure, it does not take long. Y equals 45 divided by x squared. You're just looking at the number under the radical, or the radicand is that term. Go to the table. 3 radical 5 should be our, in the table, it's 3, 5. So I know it's going to be 3 radical 5 because 45 is 9 times 5. Square root of 9 is 3 radical 5. So whether you do it by hand or the other way. But now, if there's something out front, make sure it gets multiplied. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 radical 5. All right. 800. You might say 108, but 8 can be broken down into 4 times 2. So it's actually bigger than 100 for your perfect square. So let's check in the calculator. 800 divided by x squared. You'll see quite a few that could work in here, but we want to go for the biggest one. 1-800, 2-200, 450, 532. I don't see 1 yet, so I'm going to scroll down. 10-8, 22, and then 1. That's the one we're going with. So we saw like 10-8, 22, and then the 1. So this is the one we want to go with. All right, because 800, let me show you over here. You want to make sure that you simplify it down all the way. 800, maybe you thought it was 100 times 8. Good starting point. But 8 can be broken down further. What's a perfect square that goes into 8? 4. So now you have 10 times the square root of 4, which is 2 radical 2. 10 times 2 is 20 radical 2. So you could spend a lot of time reducing, or you could go check it out in your calculator. 20 radical 2, 20 radical 2. Or maybe you noticed it was 400 times 2. 400 is a perfect square. Probably wouldn't recognize that right off the bat, but that's okay. 20 radical 2. So if you can't figure out the biggest perfect square right away, you might have some work ahead of you. So it's always nice to use that calculator. So again, you can use either of those, but I like the calculator. So now we have 1/2, we don't want to forget that, times 20 radical 2. Okay, half of 20 is 10 radical 2. All right, last one, don't be afraid of that fraction. We already did 75, right? That was 25 times 3. 5 radical 3, which again, when we typed it into the calculator, we found that in the table. All right, but we can't forget about this guy. So 2/5 times 5, basically those 5s will cancel. You're going to end up with 2 radical 3. Or, if you didn't know that, 2/5 times 5, again, second quit. 2/5 alpha y equals 2 over 5, right arrow button, times 5. 2. All right, so that's simplifying radicals. I know it's a little tricky, but with practice it gets easier, and that calculator trick is really nice. The only other thing I wanted to bring up in this video, if you wanted to combine radicals, you want to add or subtract like radicals only, and you just add or subtract the coefficients, which just stand for the number out front. You leave the radicand, you leave the number that's under there. So these all have the same radical, so just add the 5 plus the 7 minus the 6. All right, so 5 plus 7 minus 6, if you're not sure, put it in your calculator. 5 plus 7 minus 6. You don't put the radical 2 in. 6. So it's 6 radical 2. It's kind of like if you had an x with each of those. You would just leave the x. Over here we have some different ones, but some are the same. 8 radical 6 plus 4 radical 6 would be 12 radical 6. And then negative 5 radical 3 plus 12, or 12 minus 5 would be positive 7, and then radical 3. And that's your answer. You don't change the radicand. You don't change the number underneath. All right, last example, threw some x's in there. Same thing, though. Looking for the same radicand. So we have 6x and 6x. So we've got 3 radical 6x and 8 of them. So that means we have 11 of the radical 6x's. And then negative 2 and positive 5, they both have a 2x. 5 minus 2, or negative 2 plus 5, is positive 3. And then keep your radicand. Keep your radical. All right, that's it for lesson 1. You do have some practice on page 4. It does say no decimal answers. So basically, you're going to put the square root in. If you get a decimal, hit math, enter, enter. For these, you're going to want to simplify. So you can either do y equals and then the number divided by x squared, or you can simplify it by hand. I do notice a couple repeats in here, so you might be able to find them from your notes. And then at the bottom, just combining a couple. Oh, I just noticed these got bumped to the second page. I think, I'm going to look at your packet really quick. Those should be, yes, so those are on page 4 in your packet. All right, have a great day.